I never thought a broken furnace on a cold February morning would lead me to discover my wife had been keeping my brother prisoner in our basement for 2.5 years. Let me tell you how a simple heating repair turned my entire world upside down. My name is Victor Brennan, and at 58 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I'd been married to my wife, Dorothy, for 35 years, raised 2 kids who'd moved out to start their own lives, and spent my career as an electrical engineer before taking early retirement last year. We lived in a comfortable ranch-style home in suburban Milwaukee, the same house we'd bought back in 1996. Life was predictable, quiet, and exactly how I liked it. It was a Tuesday morning in February 2024 when everything changed. The temperature had dropped to -15 overnight, and our furnace decided that was the perfect time to quit working. Dorothy had left 3 days earlier to visit our daughter Beverly in Phoenix, helping her with the new baby. I was alone in the house, working on some consulting projects from my home office. I called Prairie Heating Services around 9:02 in the morning. The dispatcher said they could send someone out by noon. A technician named Eugene arrived right on schedule, a guy in his early 30s with a thick Wisconsin accent. "Mr. Brennan, I'm here about your furnace," he said, stamping snow off his boots at the front door. "Thank God. It's getting cold in here fast." I told him, leading him toward the basement stairs. "Furnace room is straight down, can't miss it." Eugene headed down with his toolbox while I went back to my office to finish up some electrical schematics for a client. About 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Brennan, this is Eugene, the technician. Can you come down here? There's something you need to see." I frowned at the message. Why wouldn't he just call up the stairs? I texted back, "What's wrong? Is the furnace shot?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, the message came through. "It's not about the furnace. There's a door down here behind your storage area. It's got 4 different locks on it from the outside. Did you know about this?" I stared at my phone, confused. A door? We'd lived in this house for 28 years. I knew every inch of it. There was no door behind the storage area. I typed back, "There's no door down there. You must be mistaken." His reply came immediately, "Sir, I'm looking right at it and I can hear something inside, like movement or breathing. You need to come down here right now." My heart started pounding. I stood up so fast my office chair rolled backward and hit the wall. I practically ran down the basement stairs. Eugene was standing near the far wall where we kept metal shelving units filled with Christmas decorations, old files, and Dorothy's craft supplies. He'd pulled one of the shelving units away from the wall. "I had to move these to check the ductwork," he explained, pointing at the exposed wall. That's when I saw it, and there it was. A wooden door painted the same beige as the basement walls, almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. But what made my blood run cold were the locks, 4 heavy-duty padlocks running down the outside of the door, all of them engaged. "I've never seen this before," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't install it?" Eugene asked, looking genuinely concerned now. "No. We've never done any renovations down here. Not since we bought the place." I stepped closer, my hand trembling as I reached out to touch the door. It was real. Solid wood, and then I heard it too, a faint sound from the other side, like someone shifting weight, like someone was standing just on the other side of that door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone there?" Silence, but it was the kind of silence that felt like someone was holding their breath. Eugene pulled out his phone. "Mr. Brennan, I think we should call the police." "Wait," I said, though I wasn't sure why. My mind was racing. Who could possibly be behind that door? How long had this door been here? How had I never noticed it? Then another thought hit me like a freight train. Dorothy? Dorothy had been the one who organized all the storage down here. Dorothy had always insisted I didn't need to go through the Christmas decorations or the craft supplies. Dorothy had been in the basement far more than I had over the years, and I started remembering things, strange things. Like how she'd started getting up earlier about 3 years ago, claiming she wanted quiet time to herself. How she'd started buying groceries in larger quantities, saying it was more economical. How she'd rearranged the basement storage multiple times, always insisting I didn't need to help. "Let me call my wife first," I said, pulling out my phone with shaking hands. Eugene looked uncertain. "Sir, if there's someone locked in there, just give me 1 minute," I insisted. I dialed Dorothy's number. It rang 4 times before she picked up. "Victor, is everything okay?" She sounded cheerful, relaxed. I could hear Beverly's baby crying in the background. "Dorothy, there's a door in our basement behind the storage shelves with locks on it. Do you know anything about this?" The line went completely silent. Not even the baby crying anymore. Then I realized she'd moved somewhere private. "Victor." Her voice had changed completely. Cold, careful. "Don't open that door." My stomach dropped. "Dorothy, what the hell is going on? Who's in there?" I said, "Don't open it," she snapped. "Just wait until I get home." We can talk about this when I get home. Talk about what? Dorothy, there's someone locked in our basement. How long has this been here? Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible since mid-2021. I thought I might vomit. 2.5 years. Who is it, Victor, please? Just trust me. Don't open that door. I'm booking a flight right now. I'll be home tonight. We can handle this together. Handle what, Dorothy? I'm calling the police right now. No. She practically screamed into the phone. If you call the police, you'll regret it. Victor, I'm begging you. Wait for me. I hung up on her. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Eugene was watching me with wide eyes. Call 901, I told him. 2 police cars arrived within 15 minutes. Officers Rodriguez and Taylor introduced themselves and came down to the basement. I explained everything, the furnace repair, finding the door, calling my wife, her reaction. Officer Rodriguez examined the locks while Officer Taylor took my statement upstairs. Then Rodriguez called down to us. Mr. Brennan, we need the keys for these padlocks and we need them now. I don't have them, I said helplessly. I didn't even know this door existed until an hour ago. Where's your wife, Phoenix? But she's catching a flight back. Officer Rodriguez exchanged a look with his partner. Sir, we can't wait for that. If there's someone potentially in distress behind this door, we need to get it open immediately. They brought down bolt cutters from their patrol car. It took nearly 20 minutes to cut through all 4 locks. With each lock that fell away, I felt my reality crumbling further. 35 years of marriage. What had Dorothy done? When the last lock was cut, Officer Rodriguez looked at me. Mr. Brennan, I need you to step back while we check this. No, I said firmly. This is my house. I need to see. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. Stay behind me. He pushed the door open slowly. The smell hit us first. Musty, stale air mixed with something else I couldn't identify. Officer Rodriguez turned on his flashlight and swept it across the space. It was a small room, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet. There was a cot against one wall, neatly made. A small battery-powered lamp, a bucket in the corner with a lid on it. Stacks of books, a folding table with notebooks and pencils, and sitting on the cot, blinking in the sudden light, was my brother Leonard. Leonard? The name came out as barely a whisper. My brother Leonard, who I'd been told had died 2.5 years ago. My brother Leonard, who Dorothy had cried over at his funeral. My brother Leonard, who I'd mourned for over 2 years. He looked terrible. His hair had gone completely gray, though he was only 53. He'd lost at least 28 pounds. His skin was pale, almost translucent from lack of sunlight. But it was definitely him. Victor, he said, his voice hoarse and unfamiliar. You found me. I don't remember much of the next few minutes. I think I might have stumbled backward. Officer Rodriguez was calling for an ambulance. Officer Taylor was radioing for backup. Eugene, the furnace technician, was standing at the top of the basement stairs, looking like he'd seen a ghost. The paramedics arrived and immediately started checking Leonard's vital signs. He was severely malnourished, dehydrated, and showing signs of vitamin D deficiency and muscle atrophy. But he was alive. Somehow, impossibly, after 2.5 years locked in my basement, he was alive. At the hospital, after they'd stabilized him and gotten some fluids in him, Leonard told us everything. In July 2021, he'd been going through a divorce from his wife of 18 years. He'd made some bad investments and lost most of his savings. The pandemic had hit his electrical contracting business hard, and he was facing bankruptcy. He came to Dorothy and me asking for help, a loan to get him back on his feet. I'd been out of town for work when he came by. I was in Detroit for a week-long engineering conference. According to Leonard, Dorothy had invited him in, said we'd talk about the loan when I got back. She'd made him tea. That was the last thing he remembered before waking up in that basement room. At first, he thought it was a nightmare. Dorothy had come down the first day and explained it to him through the locked door. She told him that he was a burden, that he'd always been a burden on our family, that I spent too much time worrying about him, helping him, bailing him out of problems. She said she was protecting our marriage, protecting our retirement, protecting me from my own soft heart. She told him that she'd reported him missing, that everyone thought he'd run away to escape his debts and failed marriage, that after enough time passed, he'd be declared legally dead, and everyone would move on, including me. She brought him food once a day, usually early in the morning before I woke up. She'd installed a small ventilation system that connected to an exterior vent disguised as a dryer vent. She'd given him books, notebooks, a battery-powered lamp that she recharged for him. She even brought him a bucket for waste that she emptied daily. Why didn't you scream? I asked him, tears streaming down my face. Why didn't you bang on the walls, Leonard? I was right upstairs for 2.5 years. He looked down at his hands, and I noticed for the first time how his fingers trembled. She told me she'd kill you if I made any noise. She'd show me news on her phone. Stories about husbands who died of heart attacks, accidents, sudden deaths. She said it would be so easy, a little something in your coffee one morning. She said, as long as I stayed quiet, you'd be safe. The detective who interviewed Leonard later told me more details. Dorothy had been planning this for months. She'd researched how to build a hidden room, how to manage ventilation, how to keep someone alive in captivity. She'd even studied cases of missing persons to understand how investigations worked. When I was away at conferences or consulting jobs, she'd been modifying our basement. She'd hired different contractors for different parts of the work, paying cash, never revealing the full scope of what she was building. To one guy, it was just soundproofing. To another, it was electrical work for a hobby room. To a third, it was installing a small ventilation system. She'd been stockpiling supplies for months, non-perishable foods, water, books, basic necessities, all stored in different parts of the house where I wouldn't notice. She'd even practiced the routine, timing how long it took her to get downstairs and back up before I'd wake up. The police arrested Dorothy at the Milwaukee airport when her flight landed that evening. She didn't even try to deny it. According to the detective who interviewed her, she'd been planning Leonard's captivity since early 2021, long before he came asking for help. She'd had the room built during the winter of 2020-2021, while I was traveling more for work and while pandemic restrictions made it easier to explain why contractors were coming and going without neighbors asking questions. When they asked her why, she'd simply said, Leonard was always the problem, even when we were kids. Victor was always cleaning up Leonard's messes. I gave Victor a good life, a stable life. Leonard would have ruined that. I did what I had to do to protect what we'd built. The trial was a media circus. Basement brother headlines ran in newspapers across the Midwest. Dorothy was sentenced to 20 years for unlawful confinement, assault, and a dozen other charges. Her lawyer tried to argue diminished capacity, but the premeditation was too clear. The built room, the supplies, the 2.5-year duration, it was all too calculated. The prosecution revealed even more disturbing details during the trial. Dorothy had researched cases of unlawful confinement, studied what mistakes other people had made. She joined online forums about soundproofing and ventilation, carefully extracting information without revealing her intentions. She'd bought supplies from different stores, paying cash, never creating a pattern that could be traced back to her. The judge called it one of the most premeditated cases of domestic imprisonment he'd seen in his 30 years on the bench. Dorothy showed no remorse during sentencing. When asked if she had anything to say, she simply stated, I protected my family. I did what was necessary. Leonard spent 3 months in the hospital. The physical recovery was challenging enough. His muscles had atrophied significantly. His bone density was severely compromised, and he had multiple vitamin deficiencies that took months to correct. But the psychological damage was even worse. He had nightmares every night. He couldn't handle being in enclosed spaces. Even hospital rooms with open doors triggered panic attacks. The doctor said it was remarkable he'd survived as well as he had. Dorothy's methodical approach to keeping him alive, the regular food delivery, the ventilation system, the basic sanitation had prevented the worst physical outcomes. But nothing could have prevented the mental trauma of 2.5 years in isolation. I retired completely to take care of him. My daughter Beverly and her husband let us stay with them in Phoenix for 6 months while Leonard went through intensive physical and psychological therapy. My son Gilbert flew in from Denver every other weekend. We became a family again, though the shadow of what Dorothy had done hung over everything. The kids struggled to reconcile the grandmother they'd known with the woman who'd imprisoned their uncle. Beverly had her own panic attacks, wondering if Dorothy had ever posed a threat to her or her children during visits. Gilbert became withdrawn and angry, questioning every memory he had of family gatherings, wondering what else Dorothy might have been hiding. We all went to family therapy. The therapist helped us understand that Dorothy had likely been planning and fantasizing about this for years before she acted. The warning signs had been there, but they were so subtle, so perfectly woven into the fabric of our daily life that none of us had recognized them. Looking back, I could see the pattern now, how Dorothy had gradually taken more control over household finances and logistics, how she'd started discouraging me from helping Leonard with his various problems over the years, how she'd begun making comments about Leonard always needing rescuing and how it was time for him to face consequences. But at the time, these had seemed like reasonable observations from a concerned wife. Dorothy had always been the practical one in our marriage, the one who managed the details while I focused on work. I'd trusted her judgment completely. Why would I question her when she said Leonard needed tough love or that we shouldn't enable him? The detective who worked our case told me it wasn't the first time he'd seen something like this. Not common, he said, but not unheard of. Family members imprisoned by other family members who'd convinced themselves they were doing the right thing. The mind, he said, is capable of justifying terrible things when it wants to protect something it values. What Dorothy had valued was the life we'd built together. The comfortable house, the financial security, the predictable routine. In her mind, Leonard represented a threat to all of that. Every time I'd helped him over the years, bailed him out of debt, let him stay with us during rough patches, co-signed loans, Dorothy had seen it as money and energy taken away from our marriage. I think about Dorothy sometimes, though I try not to. She's in a federal institution in Minnesota. She writes me letters that I don't open. Her lawyer forwards them saying she wants to explain herself, wants me to understand her reasoning. But what possible explanation could justify 2.5 years of imprisonment? What reasoning could make any of this acceptable? My children think I should go to therapy myself, and they're probably right. I wake up most nights around 300 in the morning thinking about all the mornings I walked past those basement stairs. All the times I went down to grab something from storage and walked right past that hidden door without knowing. All the times I complained to Dorothy about missing Leonard, about wishing we knew what had happened to him, while she listened and nodded and kept her monstrous secret. The funeral was the worst part to think about. Dorothy had organized a memorial service for Leonard 6 months after he'd gone missing. She'd claimed that waiting longer would just be torture for the family, that we needed closure. She'd arranged everything, the flowers, the eulogies, the reception afterward. I'd stood at a podium and talked about my brother's life, about how much I'd miss him, about hoping he'd found peace wherever he was. Dorothy had sat in the front row, crying. Actual tears. She'd hugged me afterward and told me how sorry she was for my loss, how much she knew Leonard had meant to me, all while he was locked 20 feet below the church basement where we held the reception. I'd grieved for him. I'd gone through the stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I'd finally made peace with losing my brother. And all the while he was in my basement listening to Dorothy's footsteps above, wondering if each day would be his last. It's been 18 months now since that February morning when Eugene, the furnace technician, found the door. Leonard lives in a small apartment about 10 minutes from my new place in a different part of Milwaukee. I sold the old house immediately. I couldn't stand to be in that building knowing what had happened there while I'd lived upstairs, completely oblivious. Leonard has gained back most of the weight he lost. His hair is still gray, but he smiles now, which he couldn't do for months after his rescue. He's working with a publisher on a book about his experience. His therapist says writing helps him process the trauma and might help other people understand how these situations can develop in plain sight. We have dinner together every Sunday. Sometimes we talk about what happened, but mostly we talk about normal things. The Brewers, the weather, his book progress, my grandchildren. We're learning how to be brothers again, though the experience changed both of us permanently. Leonard has forgiven me, though I'm not sure I've forgiven myself. He says I'm not to blame, that Dorothy deceived both of us. But I was his big brother. I was supposed to protect him instead. I married his captor and gave her 35 years to plot against him. Eugene, the furnace technician, still sends me a Christmas card every year. He moved to Arizona the year after the discovery, said he couldn't do furnace repairs anymore without thinking about that basement. I don't blame him. He was just trying to fix a heater and instead uncovered a horror story happening in plain sight. I've learned something important through all of this. Evil doesn't always announce itself with obvious red flags. Sometimes it sits across from you at the breakfast table for decades. Sometimes it sleeps beside you, makes your coffee in the morning, kisses you goodbye, and then goes downstairs to check on the family member it's keeping prisoner. The detective gave me advice that I think about every day. Trust but verify. It's something they use in intelligence work. Even when you trust someone completely, even when you have no reason to doubt them, you should still pay attention, still ask questions, still verify what they're telling you. I failed to do that. I trusted blindly, completely. I assumed the best when I should have been asking questions. I trusted when I should have been vigilant. Dorothy had access to every part of our lives, our home, our finances, our routines, our vulnerabilities. Most people would never abuse that access, but some do, and when they do, the damage is catastrophic precisely because they know exactly where and how to strike. If I could go back and change one thing, it wouldn't be the marriage to Dorothy. Those 35 years weren't all built on lies. Much of our life together was real. It would be the blind trust. I would ask more questions. I would pay attention to what my gut was trying to tell me about those small changes in behavior, those subtle shifts in routine. The people closest to us have the most power to harm us because we've given them complete access. They know our schedules, our habits, our blind spots. They can manipulate situations in ways that strangers never could. That's why domestic crimes are often the most shocking, not because they're necessarily more violent, but because they represent such a profound violation of the trust that makes family life possible. Looking back now, I can see all the small things that should have raised questions. Dorothy's insistence that I didn't need to go through stored items in the basement. The way she'd always volunteer to grab Christmas decorations or other stored items herself. how she'd started waking up earlier, claiming she wanted to start the day with quiet meditation time. The industrial-sized packages of granola bars and protein shakes, she said, were for emergency preparedness. The extra gallons of water she bought every week. But hindsight is 20/20. In the moment, none of it seemed suspicious. She was my wife of 35 years. I trusted her completely. And Dorothy was careful, methodical. She'd been managing household affairs for decades. Why would I question where she went in the mornings or why she'd rearranged the basement storage yet again? Leonard is sitting across from me right now as I finish telling you this story. We're at a coffee shop in downtown Milwaukee, watching the lake through the window. He's sipping a latte and working on his laptop. He can do that now, sit in public places, be around people, function in the world. 18 months ago, that would have been impossible. Recovery is possible even from the darkest situations, but prevention is better than recovery. Pay attention to your loved ones. Ask questions when things don't feel quite right. Trust your instincts when something seems off. And remember that locks on doors aren't always meant to keep strangers out. Sometimes they're meant to keep family in. The truth has a way of coming out eventually. It took 2.5 years and a broken furnace, but it came out. I only wish it had come out sooner, before 30 months of my brother's life were stolen, before my entire marriage was revealed to be built on a foundation that included such devastating deception. Sometimes the greatest dangers come from the places where we feel safest. Sometimes the people we trust most completely are the ones capable of the greatest betrayal. But we can't let that knowledge make us paranoid or destroy our ability to form genuine connections. We just need to remember to keep our eyes open, even at home, even with the people we love most. Trust, but verify. Love, but stay aware. Hope for the best. But don't ignore the warning signs when they appear, because sometimes the person sleeping next to you for decades is keeping secrets that would shatter your world if you knew them. And sometimes a simple broken furnace on a cold February morning can change everything. The most dangerous predators don't break into your home. They already have the keys, know your schedule, and sleep in your bed for decades before they strike. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't trusting completely, but caring enough to stay alert, because the people we protect by asking hard questions are often the ones we love most.